What if Anakin joined Ahsoka? Part 3. Part 1 and 2 will be linked in the description below. The Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, Palpatine, summoned an emergency Senate meeting on the bustling planet of Coruscant. He had spent countless hours behind closed doors, manipulating key senators to support his plans to challenge the Jedi Order. As the meeting began, Jedi Master Yoda and Mace Windu, two of the most powerful members of the Jedi Council, listened in secret, their eyes and ears peeled for any indication of the Chancellor's true intentions. The Chancellor stood at the podium, his voice amplified through the Grand Chamber. He spoke of the Clone Wars, a long and brutal conflict that had ravaged the galaxy for years. He explained that without the leadership of General Grievous and Count Dooku, the Separatist army had been severely weakened, and that now was the time to strike and end the war once and for all. He played on the emotions of the senators, speaking of the countless lives lost, both civilian and soldier, and the sacrifices made by all those who fought for the Republic. He then shifted the blame to Dooku, painting him as the sole architect of the war and the deaths of so many. The Chancellor then put forth the question to the Senate: should Count Dooku be held accountable for his actions against the Republic? The crowd erupted in cheers, with many senators standing in agreement. The Chancellor followed this with a pointed statement: as do I. But the Jedi hold Dooku within their custody and refuse to let him face trial, pushing their own agenda. The crowd cheers turned to boos, with many senators growing visibly angry at the Jedi's perceived obstruction of justice. Palpatine went further in his accusations by revealing that Count Dooku was a former Jedi himself, which he said was the reason why the Jedi were acting to protect him. He claimed that the Jedi were showing favoritism towards one of their own, and that this was standing in the way of true justice for the Republic and the victims of the war. The crowd grew increasingly agitated as they realized the Jedi may not have their best interest in mind. The Jedi who had been listening in secret knew that the Chancellor's words were carefully crafted to turn the Senate against them. They also knew that Dooku was a valuable asset in their ongoing investigation into Palpatine's true intentions. They had not released him because they needed him to further their own investigation. Jedi Master Yoda and Mace Windu knew the Republic was turning against them. They quickly and discreetly left the Senate meeting, heading back to the Jedi Temple to attempt to call all the Jedi back to reorganize and develop a plan. The Jedi were spread out thinly due to the war efforts, having pushed to many separatist planets and bases, knowing that they had been weakened. But with the Chancellor's manipulation and the Senate's growing mistrust towards them, they knew they needed to act fast to protect themselves. Once back at the temple, Yoda and Mace Windu immediately began to make contact with other Jedi, urging them to return to Coruscant and gather at the temple for a meeting. They knew that time was of the essence, and that they needed to come together to plan for the worst case scenario. As the Senate meeting continued, Palpatine used the opportunity to further his agenda and push the Jedi further into disfavor. He pointed out that the Jedi had been acting independently, posing a threat to the ongoing stability of the Republic. He argued that for the good of the Republic, they must be reorganized and brought under control. Palpatine then played a manipulated holographic video of his old conversations with Mace Windu, making it appear as though Windu was demanding that Palpatine bend to the rule of the Jedi. The crowd, already angry at the Jedi, grew even more uneasy at the supposed audacity of Windu. Palpatine declared that the Jedi's independence was one of the reasons for the prolonged war and the loss of so many lives. He stated that the Jedi had become a hindrance to the war effort and a danger to the stability of the Republic. He further claimed that the Jedi's refusal to hand over Count Dooku to the Republic was proof of their disregard for the law and their willingness to put their own interests above those of the Republic. Palpatine then proposed a solution to end the war and the Jedi by reorganizing the Republic into the First Galactic Empire. He stated that with a strong centralized government led by himself, the Republic would be able to bring an end to the war and restore peace and stability. He argued that the Jedi would no longer be needed and should cease to exist. The crowd, still angry at the Jedi for their perceived obstruction of justice, cheered at the Chancellor's proposal. Many senators, swayed by Palpatine's words, began to support the idea of reorganizing the Republic into the Empire. As Anakin and Ahsoka traveled through hyperspace on a Venator-class Star Destroyer, the enormity of their mission hit them. They were escorting the captive Maul back to Coruscant, but there was this eerie feeling that had been gnawing at them since they received a message from the Jedi Temple ordering them to return as soon as possible. The feeling of the dark side was palpable, and the weight of it was almost suffocating. Anakin was informed that he had an incoming transmission from Padme Amidala. As he opened the channel, Padme's worried face appeared on the hollow screen. Her voice was trembling as she said, "Anakin, I'm so worried about you. The Chancellor and the Republic have turned against the Jedi, and the temple is under siege." Anakin's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process this information. He reassured Padme that he was safe, and that everything would be okay. But deep down, he knew that things were far from alright. Suddenly, the transmission was interrupted by another incoming transmission. This time, it was Emperor Palpatine himself. Anakin and Ahsoka watched in horror as Palpatine's holographic image appeared on the hollow screen, speaking to Captain Rex and the other clone troopers aboard the Star Destroyer. "The time has come to execute Order 66, Palpatine said. Anakin felt a cold pit form in his stomach as he realized the true extent of the Chancellor's betrayal. The Jedi were being hunted and killed on sight, and the Republic they had fought to protect was now their enemy. They turned around to see Captain Rex, the trusted friend and leader of the clone troopers, pointing his blasters at them. The look on Rex's face was one of deep conflict as he was fighting the internal battle. He told them to stay back, trying to override his inhibitor chip that had been implanted in his and the other clone troopers' minds. He repeated the phrase, "Find fives," over and over as if it was some sort of code or mantra, until he couldn't fight the inhibitor chip any longer. Tears were streaming down his face as he opened fire on some of his closest friends in Anakin and Ahsoka. They were shocked. They couldn't believe that their friend, the man they had fought alongside for years, was turning on them. They quickly drew their lightsabers and defended themselves against the blaster fire, but they knew they couldn't kill their own men. They quickly disabled Rex's blaster, knocking him to the ground, leaving him unconscious. Anakin and Ahsoka quickly sealed off the room from incoming troopers, allowing them to cut a hole in the ceiling, ascending up the Venator, bringing the unconscious Rex with them. Anakin and Ahsoka crept through the narrow corridors of the Venator-class Star Destroyer, their hearts heavy with the weight of their recent betrayal. The air was thick with tension as they made their way to the medical bay, discussing the cryptic message from Rex. Find fives. They were on high alert, knowing that any moment they could be ambushed by their own men, the clones that they had once called brothers. As they rounded the corner, suddenly it clicked for Anakin. CT-5555. Fives, he said. Realization dawning on him. He tried to warn us. He must have known something was off, and he was trying to tell us before it was too late. A wave of guilt washed over him as he thought about the clone trooper Fives, who had uncovered the truth about the inhibitor chip, but was labeled as a traitor and killed for it. He continued to elaborate to Ahsoka. When Fives was thought to have gone AWOL, me and Rex confronted him. He was desperate to warn us about the chips, but we didn't listen. We thought he was delusional. Ahsoka listened in shock as Anakin recounted the events, and they both knew they had to remove the chip from Rex as soon as possible. They made their way to the medical bay where they found it to be heavily guarded. Anakin quickly hatched a plan. He would create a distraction while Ahsoka would take Rex into the medical bay to remove the inhibitor chip. Ahsoka disagreed with this plan, as it was too dangerous for Anakin to be roaming around by himself with the clones hot on his trail, but Anakin was set on this plan, not willing to deviate from it. Anakin used the Force to move equipment and make noise to distract the guards while Ahsoka quickly entered the medical bay with Rex. Anakin knew that he had to lead the clones away from the medical bay where Ahsoka was trying to work. He couldn't bring himself to harm the soldiers that he had fought alongside for so many years, and he did his best to lead them on a chase through the ship without causing any serious harm. Meanwhile, Ahsoka was trying to locate the inhibitor chip within Rex using a medical droid, but it couldn't be located by the droid's scans. She enhanced the droid's scanning capability using the Force to find and locate the chip. The medical droid began to surgically remove the chip, but time was of the essence as the clone troopers were attempting to break into the medical bay. Ahsoka sealed the door by manually overriding the controls, but she knew that it wouldn't hold for long. As the medical droid successfully removed the inhibitor chip from Rex, he came to his senses and looked around the room. The first thing he saw was Ahsoka, and he immediately felt a pang of guilt and remorse for his actions under the chip's control. He wanted to apologize to Ahsoka, but she could see the guilt in his eyes, and she knew that he didn't have to say anything. She reassured him, "It's not your fault. You were under the control of that chip. We have bigger issues at the moment, as the only thing standing between us and the clones is the door that is at the brink of being breached." Suddenly, they heard the clones start screaming in pain and blaster fire being shot. Then there was silence. Ahsoka and Rex hesitated to open the door, unsure of what they would find on the other side, but they proceeded anyways, and the scene that they saw was horrific. The clones were laying on the floor, their bodies contorted in pain, and their armor was singed black. It was clear that something had caused them great suffering. The scene was like a nightmare. It was something they never thought they would see in their life. Rex looked around in shock and confusion. He couldn't comprehend what had happened. He turned to Ahsoka and questioned if Anakin had done this, but Ahsoka shook her head and replied, "No, it's not Anakin, it's Maul. I can sense his presence, he is close." Anakin was running away from the troops, trying his best to deflect the blaster shots as he's sprinting down the hallways of the Venator. He started to become overwhelmed, the constant blaster fire and the sound of his own footsteps echoing through the ship. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his breathing was ragged as he tried to outrun his former brother in arms. He knew that he had to keep moving. He couldn't let them catch him. As he turned the corner, he couldn't believe who was running directly towards him, with a wave of clones following closely behind. It was Maul. Anakin and Maul met in the center of the hallway, forced to team up as both of them put their backs against each other, deflecting the shots that were coming in from both sides. Maul was using the Force to pull objects from the walls and use them as shields before throwing them like frisbees towards the clones with deadly accuracy. Anakin was fighting with his lightsaber, cutting down any clone that got too close. They were a whirlwind of motion, their bodies moving in perfect unison as they fought for survival. As they fought, Maul spoke to Anakin while deflecting shots. "It appears that you are not a part of the plan anymore." Anakin, angry and bitter, would rebuttal saying, "I never was." Maul responded, "Only together can we survive." Anakin could sense that Maul had some other intentions, but he didn't press on it. He knew Maul's reputation as a former Sith Lord and didn't want to get involved in his twisted agendas. Anakin and Maul continued to deflect shots as they fought their way down the hallway. Suddenly, two doors on each side of the hallway would close, cutting off the incoming wave of troops. A third door would open, and standing there was Ahsoka and Rex, side by side. Anakin was relieved to see Rex back to normal and said, "Good to have you back, Captain." He moved to stand beside Ahsoka and Rex. Ahsoka looked at Maul and said, "This is where we depart." Maul grew angry, knowing that he was about to be left behind. The door with Anakin, Ahsoka, and Rex shut as the doors that had stopped the troopers opened back up. The troopers poured in, but Maul was ready for them, using the Force to deflect blaster shots and using the lightsaber to cut down anyone in his way. It was at this moment that the Venator-class Star Destroyer had jumped out of hyperspace above Coruscant, the capital of the galaxy and the epicenter of the Clone Wars. Anakin, Ahsoka, and Rex made their way to the nearest escape pod, eager to get off the ship and away from the chaos. Anakin couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for leaving Maul behind, but he knew that they had to put their own survival first. They launched the pod and watched as the Venator disappeared into the distance. They were safe, but they knew that the fight was far from over. They would have to regroup and find a way to stop the Empire and save the galaxy from the grip of the Emperor. The siege of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant was near its end. The temple, once a shining beacon of the Jedi Order, was now a shell of its former self. The once grand halls and chambers were now littered with debris, and the smell of blaster fire and smoke filled the air. The once peaceful gardens were now scattered by blaster fire and littered with bodies of fallen Jedi and clone troopers. The once beautiful statues and murals were now defaced and destroyed. The Jedi had been forced to abandon the temple as they were vastly outnumbered by the clones, who had been augmented by the future Grand Inquisitor and other fallen Jedi. The clones alone were very formidable, especially with the sheer amount of them. The temple was no longer a place of peace, it was now a place of death and destruction. The Jedi who managed to escape the temple were now scattered, unsure of where to go or what to do. They knew that the Republic they had fought for to defend had turned against them, and they were now on the run. They knew that they could not go back to the temple, and that they could not trust anyone. They were alone in a galaxy that had turned against them. Anakin decided that he needed an update on the state of the Republic and the Jedi Order, so he reached out to Padme through a secured holo communication link. Padme's image appeared on the holo projector, her face filled with concern. "Anakin, I have terrible news," she began. "The Republic has fallen. A new government known as the Empire has risen in its place." Anakin's heart sank at the news. How could this happen? What about the Jedi Order? Are they still fighting for the Republic? Padme shook her head. The Jedi had fallen on Coruscant. Many have been killed, and the remaining Jedi have been forced to retreat off-world. I am currently on Alderaan with Bail Organa, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Yoda. We are working to resist the Empire and protect those who are still loyal to the Republic. Anakin felt a sense of dread wash over him. He had always believed in the Jedi Order and the Republic, and now they were both gone. "I'll come to Alderaan as soon as I can," he told Padme. Padme nodded. "Please be careful, Anakin. The Empire is hunting down any remaining Jedi, and we cannot risk them finding you." Anakin promised to be careful and ended the transmission as he prepared to leave for Coruscant. He couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty about what the future held. He knew that he had to be strong for Padme and for those who still believed in the old ways, but it was difficult to shake the feeling that everything he had ever known was now gone.